Battletech is an ever-expansive tabletop wargame and military science fiction multimedia franchise that had a small start back in the mid-1980s. It's a pretty cool world that combines thousands of years of space history with a dark and feudal world of factions, vying for control via mechanized combat. The IP has fallen through various hands over time and had plenty of different books, games, video games, and spin-offs, but today we're going specifically back to 2004 to take a look at the only on Xbox title, MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf. Lone Wolf is, as the title shows, a sequel to the first MechAssault game. This 2002 game has a bit of a cult following, I think largely because it was one of the first Xbox Live capable games, during a time when home console internet usage was a newer thing. A lot of people big into the Battletech universe much prefer the older brother series MechWarrior for their gaming fix, but I think the arcadey combat of the MechAssaults was picked up by a more casual player base at its time of release, just to have something to play online. Most people might remember Halo as being the big multiplayer Xbox game, but it's worth pointing out that the console version of Halo didn't actually get Xbox Live service until its PC port in 2003, which was a year after the first MechAssault released. This put MechAssault in the right place at the right time. And unfortunately, the opposite seemed to have happened with MechAssault 2. Microsoft successfully pushed Halo 2 to be the greatest of all-time success that it was, large part because of its Xbox Live capabilities. But at the same time, while acting as publisher for the combined FASA and Day One studios, managed to push Lone Wolf into a tough spot. It got pushed back until December 28th, a sudden non-competitor to Halo 2, not even getting a spot for the holiday sales. I'm not super tuned in to reading sales data, but my smooth brain sees a date right after Christmas and assumes Microsoft was intentionally trying to kill the game with that one. And maybe that's why MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf always feels forgotten compared to its first game. Overshadowed by the Xbox champion Halo 2, the PC MMORPG explosion of the year with World of Warcraft, or any of the other great titles of the year like Half-Life 2 or San Andreas. I always thought it was kind of a shame that Lone Wolf never seemed to get brought up with nostalgia and affection when I always thought objectively, as far as the single-player campaign went, is much better than the previous game. I of course had to jump back into this one to make sure my memories were correct. And me? Hi, I'm Empty. I'm a bit of a latecomer into the whole mech world, but I did manage to play the MechAssault games when I was a kid. More recently I decided I really liked big robots and have set myself up on this mission to play every single mech game ever, having this YouTube channel as a way to debrief my thoughts and feelings and observations about all of them. If you'd like to keep up with the videos, we'd appreciate a sub and a thumbs up, but if you just want to talk about big robot games, the comment section is always open. Also, my personal copy of MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf is the limited edition version, with this really cool shiny foil cover. It came with an additional bonus disc that had some extra online maps on it, as well as a 20-minute behind-the-scenes making-of video from G4 TV. When I was a kid, I secretly thought that this was kind of really boring, but I also thought it was super cool that I had a special version of the game. Maybe it rubbed off on me a bit because it's the sort of thing I'd watch nowadays. Now, Battletech is a very big intellectual property universe spanning back all the way to the 1980s. There's hundreds of full-on novels, and that's not even including all of the more rulebook type texts and the, 30 different video games. Battletech even got a 13-episode Saturday morning kids cartoon at one point. So anyways, what I'm saying is there's a ton of story to follow here, but as the most stringent and basic way that I can explain things in the universe to be relevant to the rest of this specific game story is that it's an alternative history future about human beings colonizing the final frontier. space. And these groups have splintered into several different warring factions, like the House Davion, or the Capellan Confederation, or maybe, during its most popular era, the clans.
All hands report. Hey, I know you guys think we're hiding out and no one will find us, but this isn't R&R. We need to test the battle armor that Lieutenant Foster's been working on.
Dante's a pretty nice place, even if it is an R&R. You sure we don't have time for another drink?
MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf takes place during what is known as the Jihad era. This is when a techno-religiously cultist splinter group of Comstar, named the Word of Blake, decided to try and forcibly unite the galaxy under their theology with wanton destruction. Much like how I said the clan era was probably the most popular for Battletech, the Jihad might generally be the most disliked era, or maybe that's the Dark Age. Me personally, I think looking back, it's probably poor taste to develop an entire years-long story campaign on the concept of a jihad when the country you're in is involved in a real war in real life, where terms like jihad are thrown around frequently. That's maybe just a little bit too on the nose for me, I think.
I know what you're thinking, Major.
Regardless, this era of Battletech isn't often favored, and on top of that, the story in the MechAssault games is also not canon. A lot of things end up happening here that aren't lore accurate to the rest of the Battletech universe, and that rustles some jimmies of the more hardcore fanbase. I think maybe that, combined with the release date, have something to do with why this one always seems to get forgotten. The standard or casual player base that hooked into MechAssault 1 was suddenly lost to the world of Halo 2, and the more hardcore Battletech mech fans who bought into MechAssault regardless were just mad that Day 1 invented spider mechs. So the plot continues almost directly after the first game. The Wolf's Dragoons manage to destroy a Blakist by the name of Strader and collect a mysterious Lost Tech data core. You play as, you guessed it, the MechWarrior Lone Wolf, or Tiger, as your companion Natalia Karinsky refers, and manage to test out a new prototype of battle armor based on the clan elemental suits, except our briefing boy Lieutenant Foster over there has managed to build this one with the said data core. For those uninitiated, this battle armor is more of an exoskeleton suit, think Iron Man or Fallout power armor, and less like giant walking tank. So the Wolves have got this prototype built while hiding out on Dante. Unexpectedly, the planet gets attacked by a mystery group. Spoilers, it's the Word of Blake, of course. And the trio end up in between Dante's militia and the new invaders, who are dropping in on dropships. We notice one of these in particular seems to have been shot down by the others, and we go to investigate the crash. Turns out the pilot of this shot-down dropship is a former associate of Natalia, a pirate by the name Alera. She's dangerous, but the Wolves align themselves with her because the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
We need to get off this rock and figure out what is happening. We can get you to your jump ship if you'll take us to Northwind to rendezvous with the rest of the Wolf's Dragoons. Deal. That's it! Get us to Northwind, now! Buckle up, folks.
This is quickly determined to be a mistake, as after the Wolves dock the Icarus with her jump ship, the Jezebel, she accidentally misjumps the whole group to the wrong planet. Natalia asked to go to Northwind, but now we're in Thestria. You battle through the swamp here with a final fight against the notorious 8-legged spider mech, of which also had one of those special data cores installed into it. After this, we receive transmission from the rest of our group who is at Northwind, and they reveal the mystery baddies are the Word of Blake. Foster also checks some computers here and finds out that Jezebel, piloting pirate Alera, purposefully jumped us here instead of where we wanted to go.
She betrayed us.
Next, we end up on a snowy planet, and that would be Northwind, and learn more about these data cores the WOB seem to want so bad. While Alera, to no one's surprise, stabs us all in the back, kidnapping Natalia. Foster does some investigating, which leads us to Hesperus 2. Big plot point here is that we rescue Miss Karinsky. Turns out the Blakist leader, Ritu, is the one behind all of this chaos this time. Also, we fight more spider mechs, but this time they're itty-bitty spiders instead of one large creature.
Now hold on, let me explain.
Final planet, Terra. We learn this from Alara, who appears and is all, "You don't understand, let me explain why I double-crossed you," before getting smacked around by Natalia. Turns out Jerome Blake himself made 5 of these data cores, and they're so great that they're supposed to power a new golden era of humanity, but he was scared of their misuse, so he hid them away instead. Now the Word of Blake knows about them, and needs them to wage war. Off to Earth we go to kick Ritu's butt. He pilots an extra powerful prototype mech here, though luckily it wasn't finished being built, and it doesn't have any legs, so it just kinda crawls around. Reminds me of the Zeong, except this thing doesn't fly. We destroy Ritu, but we're a bit late to stop his mass army of mechs and make for an escape. Alara redeems herself by sacrificing not only herself, but the Jezebel as well, making a crash landing directly into said mass army of super mechs. Credits roll. The plot here isn't too crazy or super in-depth or anything like that. A lot of the plot points were pretty obvious in their foreshadowing. It's still deeper than the first game, but it's not like this is going to win any trophies at the Writers Guild. I'd say this is pretty basic video game writing from the era, more of an excuse to lead you into different environments and situations than to truly weave a yarn. In my previous video about the first MechAssault game, I think I said that this was the best sound in gaming. And I think they did it even better here. It's so satisfying when one of these big boys topples over and slowly erupts, shaking the controller in your hands and detonating a burst of visual shockwave across the screen. So cool. In the same way, you'll end up using the battlesuit a lot in this game, and they did a good job making its mortar shot feel tactile when played. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it feels great to lob those things out. Most of the combat gameplay centers around controlling the different mech themselves. They all have different loadouts and armor ratings, but pretty much what you could expect. You know, different machine guns, big lasers, little lasers, missiles, jetpacks, all of that jazz. Compared to the first game, a lot more time and care seems to have went into developing a more interesting system with all of this. Mechs now have special abilities more than just a jetpack, like options for stealth and alpha strike that knocks down enemies, or a sort of rock, paper, scissors type temporary shielding system which combats different types of incoming damage. Even the small guy, the battle armor, gets its own quirks, like the ability to grapple walls with its climbing claw. Its most special ability, though, is the armor's ability to jack, as in carjacking and not any other form of jacking you could think of. If you sneak up behind enemy mechs, you can jump up onto their back and input the correct button pushes during a quick time event to force eject the pilot and steal their machine. The battle armor even gets the ability to hang from VTOLs as they fly around, which can lead to some pretty cool multiplayer team play. You heard that right, you can pilot the VTOL too, and the turrets, and the tanks, and even run around on foot, being the person who gets squashed into red goo by the giant robot's foot. During my whole playthrough, I actually kept accidentally getting out of my mech, and it was probably the scariest part of the game for me. There is an actual reason to get out of the mech though, as many times during the campaign you'll be prompted to get out and do things like open gates or move between the different vehicles. Unlike the first game, where your mech choice was presented before mission start, here you'll start in whatever is appropriate for the assignment, and then have the ability to steal your way into the machines of your choosing. Overall, this really blasted in a breath of fresh air, as the arcadey-style combat in the first game could get a bit stale after repetition. Lone Wolf feels like great growth to the initial game style and does so much to change things up here and there, but never really feels like it loses its identity doing so. With that said, the turret level was total BS, and I had a heck of a time trying to fly the VTOLs. This sequel also had an expanded multiplayer. I didn't experience this part of the game, so I can't really say all that much about it, but in addition to the expanded gameplay vehicle interactions, there was a new game type besides just shooting each other, and it was called Conquest. Here you'd choose one of the great houses of the Battletech universe to align yourself with, and multiplayer matches would take place on different planets in the galaxy set to certain specific game types, and whoever won would determine which house took control of the planet. Very cool idea that I wish I could have experienced back in the day. MechAssault was my first mech game, which makes MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf my first sequel to a mech game. I have a very fond memory of sitting in my room one summer afternoon with a sunny open window breeze, having freshly kicked off my World Industries skateboarding shoes that tied in a way that made it look like they weren't, as we all did back then. I had probably spent the morning riding my Mongoose BMX bike around the neighborhood. Anyways, I sat on the floor and booted up the old Xbox to get to blastin' mechs. I made it to the final boss of the game, the legless Uber Mech, and I just couldn't beat it. The sunlight coming through the open window turned orange and began to crest over the trees out back, and I gave up. At a certain point I figured, you know what, I'm close enough, I might as well have beat it at this point, and now I'm just wasting my time. Then I played Castlevania Curse of Darkness. As an adult coming back to this game, I always remember that moment and figured I just couldn't beat it because I was a kid, and you know what, that boss fight is still pretty hard. You're in the smallest, weakest little battle armor suit against the biggest, baddest guy in a circular ring with nowhere to hide. Natalia drops goodies from a VTOL flying overhead, but they only help so much, cause Uber Mech's attack reach is really large and really strong. And the second phase of the fight requires not just the quick-time event jack, but also pinpoint accuracy right into that dude's robo-datacord brain with a mortar attack. At least during the whole fight, you get to listen to the song right now, as played by American nu metal band Korn. Yup, you heard that right. Lone Wolf dished out the licensing for Korn, not the vegetable, but the band, for a version of the song to play during the end boss sequence. Not only that one, but they also managed to pull in Papa Roach with their song Getting Away with Murder, which functions as a bit of a theme song for the whole game, and it plays during the mid-game boss Spider-Mech fight. When I was a kid, I listened to a lot of rock radio, and it was super cool to hear the radio songs I was listening to supplanted straight into my video games, too. The rest of the soundtrack seems to be a continuation of the style of the first games. There would be a soundtrack based around stock music from the DeWolf catalog albums Big Film Night 4 and Metal Meltdown. However, in this case, Dario D-Man and Michael Cozy seem to have managed to compose this in a way that I felt was pulled off much better this time around. Maybe it's a larger, lengthier soundtrack, or just more variety, or maybe they were just in a more creative atmosphere for the music. But Lone Wolf's OST is a lot more palatable for me. Something about the arrangement feels so much more moody and touched up. Similarly, the art direction stays visually very similar, but ends up being a lot more interesting in environments. The visual fog definitely feels heavier, especially in the entity-thick cityscape levels, assuming that was to keep the game from dropping frames, but everything looks so much more detailed. I complained before the last game felt like it had a bit of a muddy filter in place over everything, which is still sort of present here, but it looks a lot better tuned. I love seeing the little shiny bits of the mechs and the cyberpunk type neon buildings that get blown apart. The variety from city to swamp to snow to desert was quite welcome, and I don't think any part of this game ever made me want to avert my eyes as much as it did make me think, this looks pretty good for an original Xbox game. Oh yeah, and the story cinematics here look so much better. Obviously, they're still going to be dated, but they feel a lot more modernized, considering they used playable assets from the game this time around instead of building animations from the ground up. The years in between these two games really seem to have let the studios fully understand and utilize the power and capability of the Xbox. You know, I'm not sure I really have much to complain about here. I don't think my playtime faced any bugs or errors really, and the gameplay itself feels like a huge step up from the original in every aspect. I guess the biggest negative is that I think some of the individual levels were designed poorly and led to more of a difficulty spike than I would have wanted personally, but even then I still managed to complete the whole game. Maybe a low point is a boring 30 seconds or so in a mission here or there when Natalia says, "Mission complete, return to base," and you've got to walk back across the empty map before it's actually over. Maybe the downside is that the story is pretty mediocre, or I guess if you're a big Battletech lore buff, then it's that the whole thing is apocryphal and full of non-canon actions and abilities. Things that aren't really a good representation of real Battletech. Maybe though the biggest downside is that at this point in time the game is console locked to retro hardware. I think it's extremely unlikely to see a port or remaster of this thing due to how much trouble Battletech in general always has with licensing and copyrights, and that's kind of a shame. It's a great game, but I don't know if it's really a selling point on its own for someone who doesn't already own or collect on the original Xbox. That, and I think a big appeal of these games during their time was the online aspect, which isn't as easily available anymore. I do believe there are fan servers for this sort of thing still up and running, but that takes a little bit more effort to get hooked into. All in all, you're looking at an under 10-hour experience for the single-player campaign for a game that fills in the shoes of its predecessor but wears them a much bigger size. I really enjoyed my time with this one and think it's one of those sequels that really outdoes the first, expanding the scope but never overdoing itself. If you're a fan of the first MechAssault or just want to throw around some old mech games from the 2000s, this one will definitely not be wasting your time walking down nostalgia lane.
Lieutenant, if you're done monologuing, we need you up on the bridge.
I think the appeal of this sort of gameplay is still there for a lot of people, and while I doubt we'd ever see MechAssault revived officially, there is a fan game by a group called New Day Fiction hoping to fall into its place. MechAssault Wolves. MechAssault Wolves is just about to release its third wave of content. This team is so dedicated to the craft, they've even managed to track down and hire some of the original voice actors from MechAssault for this. Now that's passion. Links will be available in the description for this down below, and that's all we've got for today. Thanks for tuning in. I was asked to give a shout out to the new and upcoming Mech IP EXOCAV. 200 years into the future, a Third World War event clashes across Europe, turning the German countryside around Fulda into a full-blown apocalyptic trench stalemate. The United States and its allies in NATO have deployed exoskeleton cavalry units to try and turn the tide against the East Bloc Dominion. This is planned to be a multimedia franchise, starting with a graphic novel featuring the former DC comic book artist Joe Sanchez, before moving into the tabletop miniatures wargame territory with a complete rule set and more. You can currently check out Manuel Guzman aka Lolo's art for some sick EXOCAV cover artwork, or shoot a follow to Paladin Dragoon on Twitter to keep up with things like the in-development side story The Manilia Invasion with art by Kevin John Jacob. Links will be provided in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled.